back. We have returned this morning to a special passage in the Gospel of Mark. And at the risk of repeating myself and boring you with stuff you already know, I'm going to lay it out because in just a few weeks we will be leaving the Gospel of Mark and not return to it for 3 years. So, here's a little literary review. This little 10-sentence story is the hinge upon which the Gospel of Mark, the whole Gospel, swings. Mark takes 10 chapters to tell us about 3 years in the adult life of Jesus. Remember, he doesn't bother with all that mythology surrounding the birth of Jesus. And in fact, as the earliest gospel, he doesn't seem to even have heard of those Christmas stories. But after 10 chapters of stories that begin with Jesus' own spiritual awakening at his baptism as an adult, and extending to his embarking on that fateful decision to go to Jerusalem, Mark takes 6 chapters to describe the last week of Jesus' life. Now that's meaningful. 10 chapters for 3 years, 6 chapters for 7 days. Then the hinge between these two sections is this little story about Blind Bartimaeus. This 10-sentence story is a microcosm of everything that has been told before it and everything that will be told in the chapters ahead. Here are the pertinent bones on this literary skeleton. First, it takes place on a dramatic stage, Jericho, an incredibly opulent resort city. It's the summer palace of King Herod. Descriptions of the palaces and the homes in Jericho make it sound like something out of a cable TV show about the homes of the rich and the famous. Now, I don't think it's a coincidence either that Mark sets this event in Jericho, because Jericho is the intersection between two hugely prominent Roman roads. Now remember, there aren't a lot of roads in those days that could host chariots and heavy military and engineering equipment. It's not like today when you need a GPS system to figure out the best way to get someplace. One road there at Jericho went into Jerusalem, and the other road went to Damascus. And from Damascus, you could take another road, go all the way to Rome. So Jericho was the intersection, the point of decision for Jesus and his followers between past and present, between safety and danger, between control and vulnerability. Turn back and return to the people and the places they knew best, the smaller cities, villages, and towns of Galilee. Now, a place like Geneva, in places like Geneva or Palmyra or Bloomfield, his down-home zingers aimed at the principalities and powers in Washington, the Pentagon, and Wall Street were all appreciated. But turn toward Jerusalem, the big city and citadel of Roman occupation and the central religious authority at the temple, Jesus would be viewed with suspicion and risk danger in a place where troublemakers and agitators were rubbed out like bugs on a windshield. That's the kind of dramatic stage I'm talking about. And it wasn't a coincidence. If you're hearing this story for the first time back in Mark's day, about 30 years after Jesus was executed, and only a couple of years after the temple was burned down and Jews all over Judah and Galilee were slaughtered by the Romans, this moment at the intersection of time and space would cause you to hold your breath, waiting to hear what Jesus would do. It's that kind of drama. So lurking behind the scene are two important characters in the Gospel of Mark. the forces of Roman military occupation and history, cosmic history. God, of course, is the prime mover in Mark's notion of cosmic history. So you got the forces, the Roman military forces of occupation, and you've got God, the author of cosmic history. Now, as both the psalmist and the poet for today intimate in their poems, God is in the creation, in the beginning, and coursing through it like the water courses of the Negev, and pointing it toward the future and outcome that the creator of all that is trying to nurture us towards. So at that dramatic intersection are these two competing characters, coercive authority and the creator. But there are some other less powerful and familiar characters too. The disciples, we know the 12 famous ones by name, but there were also others, sometimes numbered at 70, and including women, often not named. In Mark's stories, the disciples are almost always a foil or a brunt of a joke. They're the fools who should know better but never do. They're the ones who should get it, but they just don't. The crowd is also a familiar character. Jesus and his disciples and a large crowd were leaving Jericho, it says. There's often a crowd in Mark's stories, and the crowd is a narrative witness to the events. They usually are hungry and thirsty for a miracle or a magic trick, and they don't want to take no for an answer. The crowd in Mark is also a foil. Jesus is frequently described as trying to flee from the crowds, to get out of there, to go hide. So we have the bad apples, Roman military authority, and we have the clueless chumps, Jesus' disciples, and we have the needy whiners, the self-centered crowds. Blind Bartimaeus? He's one of the marginalized whispers. In the Gospel of Mark, the whisperers usually don't have names. A leper, a bleeding woman, a Syrophoenician woman with a dying daughter, a widow, a quadriplegic carried on a mat, another one near the edge of a pool. They're the outsiders who, even when screaming and yelling, are only whispers to the ones who are busy decorating the opulent palaces, or stocking the shelves with supplies, or setting up the chairs for worship, or feathering their nests with more power. So here we have 10 little sentences, so thick with drama. And it's amazing that this drama is still unfolding. Still is. Coercive authority, insiders and outsiders, all on the stage of history. And then there's that other character, of course, Jesus. He represents God in Mark's story. And here's how the action unfolds. Coercive authority is indifferent at Jericho. It observes benignly at first, and only later in the days ahead, when it perceives a threat, does it act. And when it does act, it acts swiftly and efficiently. The insiders and the disciples, they play the fool. How many times has Jesus reminded them that the first will be last and the last will be first? Yet their knee-jerk reaction to blind Bartimaeus is to tell him to shut up. They haven't seemed to learn much over the 3 years of hanging out with Jesus. But insiders almost always have a steep learning curve. Bartimaeus, the outsider, could have shut up, but he doesn't. He may be marginalized, but he's not powerless. In fact, he takes a huge risk. The only thing Bartimaeus has in the whole world is his coat. Your coat in those days was your blanket to sit on in the day and to cover yourself from the cold at night. It was priceless for those who had nothing else. And given that he was blind, for him to just throw off his coat and run forward where he may never find his coat again, well, that was an act of radical trust or some kind of bold desperation. It was an all or nothing kind of play. Whether hope or desperation, we can't say. The crowd, well, they're an actor on the stage also. The crowd watches. The crowd, amoeba-like, moves around the scene. Dogs bark, people shout, children kick up dust, some jeer, some cheer. The crowd is content so long as they have a good show. Finally, Jesus. Well, Jesus stops. On the monumental stage of history, at the intersection of past and future, Jesus stops. He stops this incredible cosmic drama for one lousy beggar. Hear the Spirit where it speaks to us. Thanks for being here today. Peace be with you.